Hi, and welcome back to Tuba People TV, where we talk about all things Arnold Jacobs all of the time. I'm in another basement today. Earlier, I was in the basement of Symphony Center in Chicago, but now I'm in the basement of my very, very good friend, Jeffrey Taylor.
Buds,
Jeff,
excellent.
good to see you.
Great to see you, Mike.
We had some good times back in the day.
We had some amazing times.
Jeff is a bass trombone player, and we were in Chicago Civic together for several years, and the Millar Brass Ensemble for several years. Right now, though, Jeff, you're doing something different with your career. You're a resident chaplain in Milwaukee.
That's right.
But Jeff studied with Arnold Jacobs for quite a number of years, and so that's why we're here in the basement today. So, Jeff, what would you say was the reason? What prompted you to start studying with Mr. Jacobs?
Well, it was out of necessity. I couldn't play. And what led to that was I had already been playing trombone for a couple of years, and then I had my wisdom teeth out. And to make a long story short, my teachers, Charlie Vernon and Harry Maddox of the Atlanta Symphony then, said, you know, you probably should go see Arnold Jacobs because he's really the master at diagnosing and dealing with brass players who've had problems. Having had my wisdom teeth out, there was a lot of damage that was done to my mouth. I had 3 that were impacted, and the extraction process did a lot of damage to the musculature. And so I came back playing too soon and went to a music festival that summer, actually Eastern Music Festival, where among the trumpet section was Manny Laureano. So I played Nebraska Quintet with Manny and had a great time. In fact, we keep in touch still. But as the summer progressed, my playing was getting to the point where I couldn't play, and I was in college and I was playing in the ensembles, and I had no endurance. So it was getting very frustrating to the point where not only did I have no endurance, but I had very little range. And so Charlie and Harry said, you know, you should call Arnold Jacobs. And I called Arnold Jacobs and had a couple of conversations with him. First one was just to tell him about the problem, and he says, well, I think I have a pretty good idea of what the problem is. It sounds like a malocclusion, and he went into a technical description, which as it turned out was absolutely spot on. And then the second conversation was to formalize the lesson, and he sensed the urgency. And as I found out later, getting a lesson with him is, as a regular student, there are quite a few hoops to jump through, but he gives a priority to players who are having some physical issues. So the lesson was set up, and in October of 1974, I planned my lesson around a concert that I wanted to hear with Chicago Symphony and Eric Leinsdorf conducting that night, and that morning I had my lesson with Arnold Jacobs. And the gist of the lesson was that seeing me in person confirmed the accuracy of his phone diagnosis and led to a second lesson, a follow-up to see if everything was spot on. And as a side note to the story, I had been to my dentist, the surgeon who performed the extraction, oral surgeon. I had been to another oral surgeon for a second opinion, and I'd also been to 2 neurologists, and they all said the damage was extensive and that I'd never play again. And that's really what led me to calling Arnold Jacobs, because everyone's saying I'd never play again. Well, Jacobs not only gave me hope, he diagnosed it. And the funny part of the story is when I got back and saw my dentist, I said, by the way, I met with an expert in the field, and he was able to accurately diagnose what the issue was and actually gave me some recommendations to work on. And it's really turning out really well. And the dentist said, wow, that's really fantastic. Who is this? He says, what? I said, well, it's the tuba player of the Chicago Symphony, Arnold Jacobs. And he looked at me and says, really? And I gave him the background to Jacob and why he had such a not only keen interest but extensive knowledge of, as he said, his structure and function, anatomy and physiology of brass players, not only the respiratory function but also the physical structure. And the dentist just continued for years to say, so how's that tuba player doing? So that's what led me to Chicago to have my first 2 lessons with Arnold Jacobs. And by then I had a taste of Chicago, and that led to studying with him off and on for 23 years, and also Ed Kleinhammer.
Mm-hmm. When thinking about big things and small things, what would be an example or two of a overarching large subject matter that he taught you, that you came away with, that you remember as being, a real pillar of what he was teaching you?
Well, the big thing, of course, is encapsulated in his song and wind and song philosophy, and that is, as a brass player, we're artists. So think artistically, make a statement, don't ask questions. Realizing that as artists we have a story to tell, and he would talk about in lessons, for example, you might have had a lousy day at work or at home, or the dog might have bit you or whatever, but the audience doesn't know that. So when you go before an audience, he said, lie to the audience. And he was a master at that, because he would sometimes be tired in a lesson, but he would still be lit up and effervescent. But when he got out on stage, he always told a story. So I would say the big picture was being aware as an artist, what it is to think of an artist, think of music, telling great stories. And I would say that was the big thing.
Was there anything maybe that was really specific to you, that other than the occlusion?
Well, getting past that issue, the breathing, the specific breathing exercises he gave me were very specific to me, because I had some. Interestingly enough, I went away to play in Mexico City for a year. And I'd already been studying with him for about 5 or 6 years. But I came back from Mexico City, and I'd had a series of lessons with him, and he was looking at me one day, says, I don't know what it is, but you're playing just as lousy, and your breathing is really bad. Come over here, let's do some tests. And that led to doing an on-the-spot test, a pulmonary function test, to see where my capacity was, because he had a pretty good idea of where it was before I went to Mexico. And he said, you need to go see a doctor and get this checked out. And I did, and it turned out I had some asthmatic components after living in Mexico for a year. So he incorporated some specific breathing exercises, but he said, you must always think artistically. And he had me doing a lot of buzzing, especially a lot of lyrical buzzing, and really pushing the range of buzzing. And I would say the buzzing exercises, and they were never exercises. There'd be some drills. It was always music. And he got me thinking outside of Hungarian March, Ride of the Valkyrie, William Tell. He had me thinking lyrically. And so those were the specific things I would say.
I think he really liked the love song.
Yeah.
The approach to the love song, because there's a lot of beauty associated with love songs versus maybe pirate songs, and developing that beauty.
Right, and the aspect of that he's interested in was getting you to getting involved in telling a story. When he saw that you were emotionally involved, say for instance in telling a story through your horn, he'd say, now that's what I'm after. Even if he gave the example, for instance, of someone who from a school of playing such as his or Bud Herseth, to contrast that with what we would consider a beautiful quality of sound, Miles Davis. They said, now some might say that he doesn't have a good quality of sound, but he's a phenomenal artist. That's what I want to come out.
So Jeff, can you tell me what was a typical lesson with Jacobs like for you? Is there a way to typify it?
Well, first of all, I would get there early, so I could hear him talking to the other students ahead of me, and just every now and then you would be blessed to hear him either pick up the student's horn and play, or a mouthpiece, or sing, and you just hear him sing. So that was the first thing, and I would be excited before I got there, and I get more excited when I heard that. And by the time I walked in there, I was always feeling really good. He had a way of inspiring me and making me feel good and making me feel like I was significant. So the lessons would unfold, and I said, "Okay, take out your horn and play something." And they said, "Oh, what are you working on?" And we'd either dig into the material, or as I was warming up, if he detected something, we'd go right into what he detected as either something that needed to be addressed or something that needed to be affirmed or explained. We covered a lot of material. Interestingly enough, we did cover orchestral material excerpts in preparation, but he says, I really don't like doing this because it gets you thinking too specifically and too narrow in your approach. He said, in fact, I want you to be thinking, as you said, love songs and etudes and things like that. So we would work on things, and I have to say that no two lessons were the same. There was never a formula to the lesson, just the formula of the interaction with him and what he wanted to teach based on what he was perceiving as as to how you're playing and your approach. So that would really be the best way to describe what a lesson would be.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate for me as well. No two lessons were ever the same. You had there was a period of time when the bass trombone position in the Chicago Symphony was open, and was open for a fair amount of time. After Mr. Kleinhammer left,
And before Charlie came,
before
for a
Charlie
year.
came,
Yep.
and so you had an opportunity to play with the Chicago Symphony, quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so, what was that like? You had a unique opportunity to sit next to Mr. Jacobs. What was that like for you?
Well, Mike, it was like my first time playing with the Chicago Symphony, and the first time playing with him, I was playing the fourth part on the excerpts from the Ring Cycle, specifically from Go to Dameron, and I had the chance to work on the music not only with Mr. Kleinhammer, but with Jake. But getting to sit there next to him and playing next to him and just hearing on stage, I mean, this was historical. This was all the brass players. This is the setting of there's Dale Clevenger, there's Jake, there's Bud Hurst at the few. There's Jay. There's Chris Afuli. All these legendary figures. The greatest part about that and sitting next to Jake was that everything that he had taught me was something that was natural within me, and he had a way of structuring it, explaining it, and bringing it out of me. So by the time I actually got to sit next to him and those guys in the orchestra, what I was doing when I did what I knew was right is like, it's going to sound weird, but it was easy, because everything that I'd been taught to do, I was doing, and it was just coming out. And it was an extension of what he'd been teaching me. It was affirmed. But sitting next to him is like, oh my gosh, I'm playing unison, like in 1812, that passage that the tuba and bass trombone have in that little fugue section, or octaves. Oh my gosh, I'm playing octaves, and they are so easy. The foundation of intonation, it was just, I knew before he played where the note was going to be. But just to watch him and the mannerisms, it was just like in a lesson. You'd see him and he'd be animated, and you'd see his hand tapping and giving a little cue. And before it was time to play, we would have like 5 measures before the entrance. He says, now Eddie and I worked out a unique system of communicating. It was very subtle but very effective. So you just watch me and you'll do fine. And oh, that felt good. And so there'd be pieces that we'd be playing, and I'd look, and there'd be a little flick of the finger and just a very subtle side glance to know that, yeah, we had this passage to come in together on, and we were on the same page. And talk about building a house on a rock.
Yeah. Well, I remember that was you and I were in Civic at the time when that was all occurring.
Right.
So that was you had your CSO rehearsals, and then you'd come, you'd wait for me to show up, and we'd have civic rehearsal.
And what a treat it was. It's just like, wow, getting to sit next to the master, and then this guy who got it. You had that sound, and the sound is more than a quantifiable. If you were to put the sound and get the overtone display and all that, it's more. There's soul and there's heart, and it's just like, I got so spoiled.
Well, I wasn't
sitting next to you and sitting next to Jake.
I was thinking more about Jake, but
Yeah.
it was kind of neat though to come to civic rehearsal and the chair was still warm from those guys' butts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you know, Jeff and I, we were in civic, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5, probably
Yep.
4 years.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
4 years
I think so.
together, and it's only been after our civic association that we've become Christians.
Right.
And the Lord's timing is always perfect, but it sure would have been fun to be Christians while we were sitting next to each other in civic too. But for whatever reason, it wasn't that way. But here we are now.
That's right.
So
right.
one of these days, I'll bring a tuba to Elkhorn, and
We'll go into
we'll
a
have
big
at it
room.
again.
We'll have at it. Yeah. We'll put some stuff down.
Now Puddles is here, and he goes everywhere with me. And I was telling him about you because he was asking about you, asking about you know, who's this Jeff Taylor guy, and so, well, you know, Jeff's from Atlanta, and he gave that some thought, and so he thought, Atlanta, all right. So he came up with a very special, really personalized thank you gift for you. So he knew that pepper jelly is a particularly southern cuisine delight, and so he picked out this genuine University of Oregon duck pepper jelly jam just for you. So thank you so much, Jeff, for
I'm touched, Mike.
taking this time.
Thank you, Puddles. Thank you for thinking of it.
He says you're welcome.
Mere words aren't enough. Well, there it is.
We could play some notes.
Yes, we could.
Hold on, I don't have mine. We'll come back to that in a minute. Jeff, let's buzz a melody.
Oh, how about that? Mio mio.
What are we gonna do?
Oh, come, all you faithful.
Oh, that's
It
right.
is Christmas time.
It is Christmas time. That's right. All right. Oh me, oh my, oh.
Oh my, that was quite fun.